when I switched over to Theravada and studied the suttas and found this contradiction between Mahayana and Theravada, I felt cheated, and I also felt that I wanted to enlighten many people, because most of the Buddhists in Malaysia, they are Mahayana, and I was practically I was one of the first monks to switch from Mahayana to Theravada, and many people were surprised because they thought, how can a higher vehicle monk become a lower vehicle monk? So I started to write books. The first book I wrote was Return to the Original Buddha Teachings, trying to bring people back to the original Buddha teachings. And in this book there were 3 articles. One was on Vinaya, monks' Vinaya. I wanted lay people to know a bit more about the monks' Vinaya, so that they could see who was not practicing, keeping the precepts. And then another book was about vegetarianism, how it's not really necessary in original Buddhism. And the third one was misconceptions and contradictions in Buddhism. And I think the Mahayana monks and nuns were very upset with the Vinaya article because it exposed many of them. Because they were accepting money and driving Mercedes cars and all that. And then the lay people, Mahayana lay people, many of them were upset over the vegetarian article. And because they thought monks and nuns should be vegetarians. So much so that there were at least 2 Buddhist centers, one in Kelantan, one in Terengganu, that burned this book of mine. And especially the second book I wrote, which was the main differences between Mahayana and Theravada teachings, which was basically mainly based on the writings of Professor Rhys Davids. He said that Theravada is actually original Buddhism. Mahayana grew, developed much later. So organizations like the Young Buddhist Association of Malaysia, they how do you say, they put me in their black book. And they co-storage me because the leader of this organization is a Mahayana monk. I got to know about this because from somebody inside the organization. Now, in Mahayana Buddhism, the books always talk about Mahayana and Hinayana, higher vehicle and lower vehicle. And we find this does not occur in early suttas of the Buddha in Theravada teachings. So that itself makes it obvious that Mahayana sutras developed at a later time. And the main difference between Mahayana and Theravada is that Mahayana, they teach that to become a Buddha, you have to take many lifetimes. Something like 4 Asankhya Kappas and 100 Mahakappas, which is like an infinite length of time. In other words, don't practice now, it's no use. And they have this Kuan Yin Bodhisattva or Tara, Avalokitesvara, and Amitabha Buddha, and Medicine Master Buddha, which is not found in Theravada. So they also have this external kind of savior that you could pray to, which is not the Buddha's teachings. So the teachings are different, and even the practice of Vinaya is different. They talk about the Bodhisattva vows, and in this Bodhisattva precepts, they even discourage you to go alone into the forest to practice. It's not allowed in the Bodhisattva precepts. So all these contradictions can be found. And on top of that, if you investigate Mahayana teachings, you find that contradictions inside Mahayana teachings. For example, the Amitabha Buddha Sutra says that if you recite the Amitabha Buddha's name, you'll be reborn in the Pure Land. And then in the Chinese Sixth Patriarch Sutra, Sutra of Hui Neng, they asked him, is it true if you recite the Buddha's name, you can be reborn in the Pure Land? And he said, if your heart or your mind is pure, the Pure Land is very near. If your mind is impure, or your heart is impure, the Pure Land is very far. And then he also said, foolish people recite the Buddha's name, wishing to be reborn in the Pure Land. Wise people purify their heart. So these are some of the contradictions. And then another one is the Earth Store Bodhisattva Sutra, or Siddhika Sutra, where it says that in the beginning, when the Buddha was about to preach this sutra, millions and millions of Buddhas came to listen. But in the Theravada Suttas, the Buddha says that an Arahant or a Buddha, once he enters Nibbana, he does not come back anymore. No one can see his body or hear his voice again, which actually also is found in the Diamond Sutra. In the Diamond Sutra, it says that the Mahayana Diamond Sutra, it says that now that the Buddha has entered Nibbana, if you think you want to see him again or hear his voice or touch him, then you don't understand the Dhamma. You have gone the deviant way. And this contradicts this Earth Store Bodhisattva Sutra, where it says that millions and millions of Buddhas came. So now this thing about the Mahayana teachings. Nowadays, people say they want to practice Mahayana teachings, and yet at the same time, they say that people who were born during the Buddha's time, they have higher paramis, that's why they are born during the Buddha's time. Here is where the contradiction lies, because they claim that the Buddha's Arahant disciples could not understand the higher teachings. That is why the higher teachings were hidden away from them. And this Nagarjuna had to go to the ocean, the dragon's palace, and recover these Mahayana sutras to teach to the people now. But if the Buddha's disciples cannot understand the higher teachings, how can the people nowadays understand the higher teachings? They don't have a fraction of the wisdom of Sariputta or Moggallana. Now, the main difference probably you could say between Mahayana and Theravada teachings is that in the suttas, the Theravada suttas, the Buddha says that the Dhamma has a flavor, one flavor, the flavor of liberation. But you cannot find this in Mahayana sutras. There is absolutely no flavor of liberation in the Mahayana sutras. It's all extolling the Bodhisattvas, praising the Bodhisattvas. If we look into some of these Mahayana sutras carefully, with a clear mind, you find some of them actually don't hold water. For example, the Amitabha Sutra, it says that you recite the Buddha's name and you can be reborn in the Pure Land. Firstly, this contradicts the Theravada Sutra, the sutta where the Buddha says that no amount of prayers or vows can get you what you want. You have to work for it, do the right thing, create the right conditions to get you what you want. And then there's another sutta where a Brahmin came to ask the Buddha. He says that they believe that when their relative passes away, they hold up his corpse and make him look skywards and call out his name, and he will go to heaven. Then he thought that the Buddha, being a Sammasambuddha, Arahant, with psychic powers, could bring everybody to heaven. And the Buddha gave the simile that if you threw a stone into water, the stone would sink. But if you threw oil into water, the oil would float. So the Buddha says, a person with heavy karma is like a stone that sinks to the bottom. So a person with evil karma, the evil karma will drag you down to the woeful plains. But a person with good karma will float up like the oil to heaven or to the human realm. So it just goes against Buddhist principles. We talk about this Amitabha Sutra again. and another one, the Filial Piety Sutra. In the Amitabha Buddha Sutra, this idea about reciting the Buddha's name can bring you to the Pure Land. And they claim that this is based on the vows of the Amitabha Buddha, on who, out of compassion, made these vows to help living beings. But if Amitabha Buddha was really compassionate, then why should he have this condition where you have to recite his name before you go to heaven? Is it like somebody telling you, oh, you want my help? Sure, you kiss my feet. If a person is compassionate, there's no reason for any condition to be put. If he puts any condition, that means he only wants to help certain people, not other people. It's just like Christians saying you have to be baptized before you can go to heaven. So if you're not baptized, you cannot go to heaven. That's putting a condition. That's not reasonable. That's not the characteristic of a compassionate person. So it goes against logic. The other one is the Filial Piety Sutra. In this sutra, the Buddha was supposed to be walking in the forest. Then he saw the bones of a human skeleton on the ground, and then he bowed down to the skeleton, paid respect to the skeleton. And Ananda was surprised, and Ananda asked him, Bhagava, living beings bow to you. Why do you bow to this skeleton? And then the Buddha was supposed to have said, Ananda, you have shallow wisdom. You don't understand the Tathagata. These bones could have been the parents of the Tathagata in a past life. And people without wisdom, when they read this, they simply accept it. But if it is possible that the Buddha can bow to a pile of bones, and it's not even living, so if the pile of bones were alive, all the more reason to bow, isn't it? Now suppose the Buddha, in fact the Buddha said, you can hardly meet any living being who has not been your mother or your father or your relative before in the past. So okay, now suppose one day the Buddha meets a pig who was his previous life mother, then he should bow all the more to that pig, to the or he meets his disciple who was his mother or his father before, then he should bow to the disciple. But is it the Buddha bowing to the disciple, or is it the disciple bowing to the Buddha? So it just doesn't make any sense. So okay, we'll talk about the Vimalakirti Sutra. This is one of the few several Mahayana sutras that try to belittle Arahants, and in particular Sariputta. And in the Theravada suttas, the Buddha always praised Sariputta as the disciple with the highest wisdom. And the Buddha says that just like an emperor or a king has a crown prince, so in the same way the Buddha said the Dhamma Raja, the king of the Dhamma, namely the Buddha, has a son, and that son is Sariputta. And the Buddha always praised Sariputta. But in the Mahayana Sutra, they try to belittle the Arahants, and in particular Sariputta. And in this Vimalakirti Sutra, they talk about this layman called Vimalakirti, who was supposed to be like a man of the town, you know. He's a real socialite. He goes to bars, goes to karaokes, goes to drink beer and all that. And at the same time, he's the topmost in wisdom, same on par with Manjushri Bodhisattva. So it seems he met this Sariputta, and then this dragon lady came down to converse with them. And according to this sutra, the moment Sariputta saw this dragon lady, just because she was a woman, not a man, he was very uncomfortable. He wasn't happy that a woman was coming to talk to them. And then it seems this dragon lady was chased off by Sariputta. So she knew that Sariputta didn't have psychic power, and she used her psychic power to make these heavenly flowers fall from the sky. And as soon as they touch this Vimalakirti and Manjushri Bodhisattva, they just shake it off and the flowers would fall off. But when they fell on Sariputta and he tried to shake the flowers away from his robes, they stuck to his robes. In other words, they want to make him look like a fool. And then she had her fun, and then she turned into a Buddha and flew away. This of course contradicts the Theravada suttas that a female cannot become a Buddha, although a lady can become an Arahant. So this is just a typical sutra trying to really put down Sariputta. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha encouraged monks to speak out against our Dhamma and to speak the real Dhamma. And the Buddha always referred to the real Dhamma as the suttas. In the Anguttara Nikaya also, the Buddha said that if any monk says that such and such is the Buddha's teachings, you have to compare it with the suttas, the original suttas and the Vinaya. And if it does not conform to the suttas and the Vinaya, then he said to reject it. So unfortunately nowadays a lot of monks, they teach from later books like the commentaries and the Abhidhamma and the Visuddhimagga. But I think we should all go back to the suttas, because there are a lot of practical teachings in the suttas. How to practice, how to conduct oneself, etc. There's a wealth of information, practical information. That's why the Buddha says that his Dhamma always has the flavor of liberation. So if we are aiming for liberation, we should always go back to the original words of the Buddha. If we were to study the words of the Buddha, we would have this feeling like we are sitting next to the Buddha. He's here amongst us, teaching us. And initially when I started to learn the suttas, I was very much taken up by it, so I spent a lot of time reading the suttas. And some monks criticized me for not following a teacher. But then after studying the suttas, then I found that the Buddha said, in the future when I'm not around, the Buddha said, take the suttas as your teacher. He never encouraged us to go here and there looking for a teacher. In fact, if a person understands the Dhamma, has attained stream entry, the Buddha says he becomes independent of others in the Buddha's dispensation. He would not be running here and there looking for a teacher. So actually the sign of one of the signs of a person, if he has entered stream entry, is that he would not be chasing after teachers. So it is our great fortune that the true Dhamma is still with us. The Buddha said when he contemplated the past 91 world cycles, he only saw 6 Sammasambuddhas. And out of the 6, 3 were already on this kappa, this world cycle. In other words, for the last 90 world cycles, he only had 3 Sammasambuddhas, or like 1 in 30 world cycles. That's an extremely long time. So we are indeed very, very fortunate now that the true Dhamma is with us, and we should make use of this opportunity. We may not meet it again for a very, very long time.